The flames reached toward the sky like grasping fingers, orange and gold against the black of night, and Mira stood before the burning hut with her hands still blistered from building it. The pack circled around her, their eyes reflecting firelight, their wolves so close to the surface that she could smell the musk of fur and fury in the air. "You brought this on yourself," Beta Garrick snarled, his voice carrying over the roar of the fire. "Building that abomination. What did you think would happen?" Mira's throat was raw from screaming, from begging them to stop, but she'd given up on words. She could only watch as the structure she'd spent 3 months constructing collapsed in on itself, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness like dying stars. The wood she'd carried from the forest, piece by piece. The mud she'd mixed with her own hands until her fingers bled. The roof she'd thatched from river reeds, working by moonlight when the others were asleep so they wouldn't see. So they wouldn't mock her more than they already did. All of it. Gone. "The moon goddess weeps for your foolishness," someone called from the crowd. Laughter followed, cruel and sharp. The fire crackled, wood splitting with sounds like bones breaking, and Mira felt something crack inside her chest to match it. "Let this be a lesson," Beta Garrick announced. "We do not pretend to be something we're not." The pack howled their agreement, the sound rising to the moon that hung fat and silver above them. That same moon Mira had dreamed of every night for the past 6 months. That same moon whose voice had whispered to her in sleep. Showing her visions of a structure made of wood and stone and earth, telling her to build, build, build. She'd thought she was going mad at first. Omegas didn't receive visions from the moon goddess. That honor belonged to alphas, to lunas, to wolves with power running through their bloodlines. Not to Mira, who'd been born the runt of a runt, whose wolf was so small the pack had debated whether she even qualified as one of them. But the dreams had persisted, growing stronger, more insistent, until she'd woken each morning with the phantom taste of sawdust in her mouth and the ache of labor in her muscles. Until she couldn't ignore it anymore. So she'd built the hut, and the pack had noticed, and now it was ash. "Go back to your den," Beta Garrick ordered, already turning away. "And if I catch you trying to build anything again, exile will be the least of your concerns." The pack dispersed, their excitement fading now that the entertainment was over. They left Mira standing alone in the clearing, the heat from the dying fire making sweat run down her back, mixing with tears she refused to acknowledge. She stood there until the flames burned down to embers, until the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Her legs ached, her hands throbbed, her heart felt like something had hollowed it out and left nothing but empty space behind. Why? She wanted to scream at the moon, still visible as a pale ghost against the brightening sky. Why did you make me build it if they were just going to destroy it? Why give me a vision if it meant nothing? But the moon offered no answers, and eventually Mira turned and walked back toward the communal dens. Saw her feet leaving prints in the dew-soaked grass. She'd been wrong. The dreams had been nothing but her own desperate mind trying to make her feel special, trying to convince her she mattered. She should have known better. She should have learned by now that Omegas like her didn't get visions, didn't get prophecies, didn't get anything except scraps and scorn. Mira was halfway across the clearing when the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. 6 months earlier. The first dream came on the night of the full moon, which Mira later realized should have been a sign. She'd fallen asleep in her usual corner of the Omega Den, a space barely large enough for her to curl up in, pressed against the cold stone wall. The other Omegas had claimed the spots closer to the fire, as they always did, leaving Mira with the drafty edges where winter wind whistled through gaps in the rock. She'd grown used to the cold, used to being last, used to the way the pack treated her like something stuck to the bottom of their paws, necessary to scrape off but not worth examining too closely. In the dream, she stood in a forest clearing she didn't recognize. Moonlight poured down like liquid silver, so bright it hurt to look at, and the air smelled of pine and something else, something ancient and powerful that made her wolf whimper and press low. "Build," a voice whispered, and Mira couldn't tell if it came from outside or inside her own head. Build what I show you. Images flooded her mind. A structure, small but sturdy, made of wood and stone and packed earth. Walls that would stand against wind and rain. A roof that would keep out the cold. A door that would close, that would lock, that would keep others out and her safe inside. A home. I don't understand, Mira said, or tried to say, but her mouth wouldn't form the words. Why? What is this for? Protection, the voice answered, and now Mira was certain it came from everywhere at once, from the trees and the earth and the moon itself. When the earth shakes and the sky bleeds, you will need shelter. Build it now before the time comes. Build it exactly as I show you. More images. The precise angle of the roof, the depth the foundation posts must be sunk, the way to weave the reeds for thatching, to mix mud with grass for walls that would hold. Every detail burned itself into Mira's memory with a clarity that felt supernatural. I'm just an Omega, Mira protested. Nobody will listen to me. Nobody will care. They don't need to listen, the voice said, and there was something sad in it, something that ached. They only need to survive. Build, daughter. Build before it's too late. Mira woke with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs. The den was dark except for the dying embers of the fire, and the other Omegas slept on, undisturbed. She pressed her hands against her face, feeling the cold sweat there, and told herself it was just a dream. Stress, maybe. Or hunger. She'd only eaten one meal yesterday, the scraps left after the higher-ranking wolves had finished. Just a dream. But the images wouldn't leave her mind. Even when she closed her eyes, she could see the hut, could feel the weight of wood in her hands, could smell sawdust and earth and rain. 3 nights later, the dream came again. And again, the night after that. By the end of the week, Mira dreamed of nothing else. The hut, the voice, the urgent, desperate need to build. You look terrible, Benna said one morning, eyeing Mira over a breakfast of dried meat and berries. Benna was the closest thing Mira had to a friend in the pack, apart from her twin sister Serenia, whom she hardly see anymore, though even that friendship had limits. Omegas learned early not to get too attached to each other. Loyalty to the pack came first, always, and friendship was a luxury that could be revoked at any moment. I haven't been sleeping well, Mira admitted. She tore a piece of meat into smaller pieces, not really hungry but knowing she'd regret it later if she didn't eat. Bad dreams? Mira hesitated. Then, because the images were driving her slowly mad and she needed to tell someone, she nodded. Something like that. What kind of dreams? Benna leaned forward, lowering her voice. The other Omegas were spread throughout the communal eating area, but sound carried easily in the den, and gossip spread faster than wildfire. It's stupid, Mira said. Forget I mentioned it. Now you have to tell me. Benna's eyes gleamed with curiosity. Come on, is it about a male? Please tell me it's about a male. We could all use some entertainment around here. Despite herself, Mira almost smiled. No, not a male. Then what? The words came out before Mira could stop them. I keep dreaming about building something, a hut out in the forest. The dreams feel real, like someone's showing me exactly how to do it, exactly where to put it. Every detail. Benna stared at her for a long moment. Then she laughed, loud enough that several heads turned. A hut? Mira, we're wolves. We live in dens. Why would you build a human dwelling? Heat flooded Mira's cheeks. I know it sounds crazy. It sounds crazy because it is crazy. But Benna's voice was kind, not mocking. You're probably just stressed. The pack's been harder on you lately. That was an understatement. Ever since Mira had accidentally challenged Beta Garrick during a pack meeting, she'd only been trying to point out that the hunting routes needed to be changed because prey was getting scarce. But apparently speaking up when you were an Omega was considered a challenge. Life had been even more difficult than usual. Maybe, Mira said quietly. But that night, the dream came again. And this time, the voice was more insistent, more urgent. "Time is running short," it whispered. "Build now, or all will be lost." When Mira woke, she made a decision. Maybe she was going mad. Maybe the dreams meant nothing. But she couldn't shake the feeling that they were important, that they were real, that ignoring them would be a mistake she'd regret for the rest of her life. She would build the hut, even if it made no sense, even if the pack mocked her, even if it was the most foolish thing she'd ever done. She would build it. Getting the materials proved harder than Mira expected. The pack controlled all resources, and Omegas needed permission to take anything beyond basic necessities. Mira knew if she asked Beta Garrick for wood and tools, he'd laugh in her face, or worse. So she had to be creative. She started small. Fallen branches collected during her assigned forest patrols, carried back one or two at a time and hidden in a spot she'd found near the western boundary. Stones gathered from the river during water runs slipped into her pockets until they weighed her down. A rusty hand axe she found abandoned near the old mining site, its blade dull but serviceable. It took weeks just to gather enough materials to start. Weeks of sneaking and hiding and lying about where she'd been. Weeks of Benna giving her concerned looks and asking if she was feeling all right. Weeks of dreaming every single night about the hut, the voice growing more desperate each time. "The earth will shake soon," it told her. "The sky will bleed. You must hurry." Finally, Mira had enough to begin. She chose a spot the dreams had shown her. A small clearing deep in pack territory, but far enough from the communal areas that she might work undisturbed. The ground was level, the soil good for building. Trees surrounded it on 3 sides, providing shelter from wind and prying eyes. The first morning, she sank the foundation posts. The physical labor felt like coming home. Her muscles remembered movements she'd never made. Her hands knew exactly how to notch wood and lash joints. The knowledge from the dreams flowed through her like water, effortless and natural. She worked before dawn and after dusk, stealing hours when the pack was occupied with their own concerns. Her body ached constantly. Her hands developed calluses on top of calluses, blisters that burst and bled and hardened into scars. She lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, by skipping meals so she'd have more time to work. But the hut grew. Foundation, frame, walls. Slowly, painfully, impossibly, it took shape. And that's when the pack noticed. "What are you doing?" Mira jumped, nearly dropping the bundle of reeds she'd been carrying. She turned to find Cade standing at the edge of the clearing, his arms crossed over his broad chest, his expression caught between confusion and amusement. Cade was a mid-ranking wolf, not important enough to wield real power, but comfortable enough not to worry about survival. He'd never been particularly cruel to Mira, but he'd never been kind either. He was simply indifferent, like most of the pack. Mira's mind raced, trying to come up with an explanation that wouldn't sound completely insane. "I'm building something. I can see that." Cade walked closer, eyeing the partially constructed hut. "But why? What is this supposed to be?" "A shelter," Mira said, "for storage, somewhere to keep tools and supplies when we're out on this side of the territory." It was a terrible lie, transparent and flimsy, but it was all she had. Cade raised one eyebrow. "The pack has storage dens. We don't need human buildings." "I know, but nothing." He turned to leave, already losing interest. Beta Garrick should probably know about this. Seems like a waste of time and resources. "Wait!" Mira called, desperation sharpening her voice. "Please don't tell him. I'll tear it down. Just give me a few days to finish, to dismantle it properly." Cade paused, glancing back. Something flickered across his face, too quick for Mira to identify. Then he shrugged. "Whatever. Not my problem. But when Garrick finds out, and he will find out, don't expect me to defend you." He left, and Mira stood in the clearing with her heart still racing. knowing the countdown had begun. It was only a matter of time before word spread, before the whole pack knew what she was doing. She worked faster after that. Desperately. The dreams had become almost violent in their intensity, the voice screaming now instead of whispering. "Build! The time comes! The earth will shake and the sky will bleed, and if you don't finish, all will be lost. Build!" Mira's hands shook as she wove the final sections of the roof, her vision blurred with exhaustion. She hadn't slept more than a few hours in days, hadn't eaten a proper meal in longer. But she was close, so close. Just a few more days and it would be done. Well, well, well. Look what we have here. The voice froze the blood in Mira's veins. She turned slowly to find Beta Garrick standing in the clearing, flanked by half a dozen pack warriors. Behind them, she could see more wolves gathering, drawn by curiosity or the promise of entertainment. "Beta Garrick," Mira said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I can explain—" "Oh, I'm sure you can." Garrick walked forward, his eyes traveling over the hut with disdain. "You can explain why you've been stealing pack resources, why you've been neglecting your duties, why you've been building this thing." He said the last word like it tasted foul. "What I want to know is what made you think, even for a moment, that this was acceptable." "I had to," Mira said. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I've been having dreams, visions. The moon goddess showed me—" Laughter erupted from the gathered wolves. It echoed through the clearing, harsh and mocking, and Mira felt her face burn with shame. "Visions?" Garrick repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think the moon goddess speaks to you? To an Omega?" He stepped closer, and Mira could smell his anger, hot and acrid. "The moon goddess speaks to alphas, to wolves of power and breeding. She doesn't waste her time on runts who can barely shift." "I know how it sounds," Mira tried, "but the dreams were real. She told me to build this, that the pack would need it when—" "When what?" Garrick cut her off. "When the moon falls from the sky? When humans learn to fly? Save your fantasies for someone who might believe them." "Burn it down," someone called from the crowd. "Yes," another voice agreed. "Burn it. Teach her a lesson about her place." Mira's wolf surged forward, protective of what they'd built, but she forced it back down. Fighting would accomplish nothing except getting her killed. "Please," she said instead. "Please don't. I'll leave it. I won't work on it anymore. Just let it stand. It's not hurting anyone." "It's an eyesore," Garrick said, "and a symbol of your disobedience. Did you really think you could go against pack law and face no consequences?" "I didn't mean to disobey," Mira whispered. "I was just following the dreams." "Then you're either a liar or insane. Possibly both." Garrick turned to the warriors. "Tear it down and make sure she watches." "No!" The word tore from Mira's throat before she could stop it. She lunged forward, but hands grabbed her, holding her back. She struggled, her wolf howling inside her head, as the warriors approached her hut with torches. "This is for your own good," Garrick said, almost conversationally. "You need to learn your place in this pack, and that place is not building human dwellings and claiming to receive visions from the moon goddess." The first torch touched the thatched roof, and flames blossomed like deadly flowers. Mira screamed. She couldn't help it. Watching her work burn, watching 3 months of labor and devotion and desperate faith go up in smoke, felt like watching a part of herself die. The dreams had been so real, the voice so certain. She'd believed with everything in her that this mattered, that this was important, that she was doing what the moon goddess wanted. But maybe Garrick was right. Maybe she was just a mad Omega with delusions of grandeur. Maybe there had been no visions, no voice, no prophecy, just a broken mind trying to make her feel special. The pack watched the fire burn, their faces gleaming with satisfaction or indifference. No one looked sorry, no one tried to stop it. And why would they? Mira was nothing. Less than nothing. An Omega who'd overstepped and needed to be reminded of her place. The hut collapsed, sending up a shower of sparks that looked like falling stars, and Mira felt something inside her collapse with it. She was halfway back to the den, her feet moving automatically while her mind remained blank with shock, when she heard footsteps behind her. Mira. Alpha Theron's voice carried the weight of command that made every wolf instinctively want to submit. Mira stopped walking but didn't turn around. She couldn't bear to see the judgment in his eyes, couldn't stomach another lecture about her place in the pack hierarchy. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." Mira turned slowly. The Alpha stood 10 paces away, his silver-shot hair gleaming in the fading light, his posture radiating the kind of authority that came from generations of pure bloodline. He wasn't as cruel as Beta Garrick, but he was harder in ways that mattered more. Garrick's cruelty was hot and impulsive. Theron's was cold and calculated. "I warned you," Theron said quietly. Behind him, the sky still glowed orange from the burning hut. "3 weeks ago, I called you to my office. I told you to stop this madness. Do you remember what you said to me?" Mira's throat felt tight. "I said I couldn't." "You said you wouldn't." Theron took a step closer. "I gave you a direct order to cease building that structure. I told you it was disrupting pack cohesion, wasting resources, and making you look unstable. I offered to have the pack healer examine you to see if perhaps the stress of your position had affected your mind." Another step. "And you refused. You promised me you'd stopped, and then you continued in secret." "The dreams? There are no dreams." The Alpha's voice cracked like a whip. "There is no prophecy." There was only a disturbed Omega who couldn't accept her place and decided she was special enough to receive visions from the moon goddess herself. He shook his head, and something that might have been disappointment crossed his face. "I tried to be merciful, Mira. I tried to give you a chance to correct your behavior quietly, but you forced my hand." Mira felt her wolf curl up inside her chest, small and frightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're exiled." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples through everything. "Effective immediately. You have until dawn to gather your belongings and leave pack territory. If you're found within our boundaries after sunrise, you'll be treated as a rogue and dealt with accordingly." The world tilted sideways. "Alpha, please." "The decision is final." Theron's expression hardened into something that looked like granite. "You brought this on yourself. You were warned. You disobeyed. In some packs, that would be a death sentence. Consider exile a mercy." He turned and walked away, his back straight and unbending, leaving Mira standing alone in the gathering darkness. Exile. The word echoed in her head like a death knell. Wolves without packs were vulnerable in ways that went beyond the physical. They lost the protection of pack bonds, the mental connection that helped them stay sane during the full moon, the hierarchy that gave structure and meaning to their lives. Lone wolves went mad eventually. Everyone knew that. Mira made it back to the Omega den on legs that felt like water. Inside, the other Omegas had already heard. They kept their distance, not meeting her eyes, as if exile might be contagious. Even Benna turned away when Mira looked at her, shame and fear warring on her face. Mira gathered her belongings, a spare set of clothes, a thin blanket, a knife with a chipped blade, and walked out into the night without saying goodbye. No one tried to stop her. The forest at the eastern edge of pack territory was dense and wild, the kind of place where civilization gave way to something older and less forgiving. Mira walked until her legs gave out, then curled up beneath an ancient oak and tried not to think about what came next. She woke at dawn, shivering and alone, with dew soaking through her clothes, her stomach cramped with hunger. Her body ached from sleeping on roots and stones, and her mind felt fractured, split between grief for what she'd lost and a bitter, burning anger at the injustice of it all. "I was right," she thought viciously. "The dreams were real. I know they were real." But knowing didn't change anything. The hut was ash. The pack had rejected her, and she was alone. The first week was the hardest. Mira had never learned proper survival skills, Omegas weren't taught to hunt or forage, only to serve and obey, so she survived on whatever she could find. Wild berries that left her mouth stained purple, roots that tasted like dirt. Once, a rabbit that had been killed by something else and left half-eaten, which Mira finished despite the maggots already claiming it. She found shelter in a cave carved into a hillside, shallow but dry, with enough space for her to stretch out fully. It smelled of animal musk and old bones, but it kept the rain off her head and the wind from stealing her body heat. At night, she dreamed. But the dreams had changed. They were no longer gentle instructions showing her how to build. Now they were violent, urgent, filled with images of fire and death and the earth tearing itself apart. "No time," the voice screamed at her. "No time left. You must build now before it's too late." Mira woke from these dreams gasping and drenched in sweat, her heart trying to escape her chest. Once she woke screaming and the sound echoed through the forest until even the insects went silent. She was going mad. She had to be. This was what happened to lone wolves. The isolation ate at their minds until there was nothing left but fragments and fear. But the dreams persisted. They grew stronger, more insistent, until Mira couldn't tell anymore where sleep ended and waking began. She would be gathering berries and suddenly see visions of the hut overlaying reality. She would be drinking from a stream and hear the voice whispering urgently in her ear, though when she spun around, no one was there. "Build, build, build." "I can't!" Mira finally screamed into the empty forest, her voice raw and broken. "I built it, and they burned it. I tried, and they exiled me. What do you want from me? What more can I possibly give?" The forest offered no answer. Only the wind through the leaves and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Mira sank to her knees in the dirt, surrounded by the scattered remains of her meager existence, and felt despair close around her throat like fingers. She'd lost everything. Her pack, her home, her sister, even her own sanity. And for what? For dreams that might be nothing more than her mind's way of breaking. She should give up. Should accept that she'd been wrong, that Theron and Garrick had been right, that she was just a disturbed Omega with delusions of importance. Should find a cliff high enough and end this misery before it got worse. But even as the thought formed, something in her chest rebelled against it. Some stubborn, burning core that refused to be extinguished. "What if they were wrong?" that part of her whispered. "What if the dreams are real and you're the only one who can save them?" Mira lifted her head and looked at the forest around her. At the trees that grew straight and strong, at the stones scattered across the ground, at her own scarred, calloused hands. She could build it again. The thought was insane. She was alone, exiled, barely surviving. She had no tools, no materials, no help. Building the hut the first time had nearly killed her, and she'd had access to pack resources then. But the voice in her dreams was screaming now, desperate and furious. "Build! There is no more time. Build or everyone dies. Build!" "All right," Mira whispered to the empty air. "All right, I'll build it." She didn't know if she was talking to the moon goddess or to herself or to the creeping madness she could feel eating at the edges of her mind. But she meant it. She would build the hut, even if it killed her, even if no one ever saw it. Even if she was wrong and insane and doomed, she would build. Mira started with the trees. Without an axe, she couldn't fell the large ones, so she focused on saplings and branches. She used her chipped knife to cut and strip bark, working until her hands bled and her muscles screamed. The knife broke on the third day, the blade snapping cleanly in half, so she sharpened stones instead and kept working. The location came to her in dreams, a clearing half a mile from her cave, ringed by ancient oaks with a spring bubbling up from the ground nearby. The earth there was soft enough to dig into but stable enough to support a structure. She worked from dawn until dark, sometimes beyond dark when the moon was bright enough to see by. Her body became a machine of pain and motion. Blisters formed and burst and formed again. Her back developed a permanent ache that never quite went away. She lost more weight, her clothes hanging loose on a frame that was already too thin. But the hut began to take shape. Foundation posts sunk deep into the earth, just as the dreams showed her. A frame of interlocking branches, lashed together with strips of bark and vine, walls of woven saplings, gaps filled with mud and grass. It was slower this time, harder, and there were moments when Mira would collapse beside her work and sob from exhaustion and frustration. But she didn't stop. On the 7th day, as she was dragging another load of river reeds for thatching, she caught a scent that made her freeze. Wolf. Close. Moving toward her position. Mira's first instinct was to run. She was in exile, and if pack wolves found her this close to the boundary, they'd be within their rights to kill her. But exhaustion had made her slow, and before she could decide what to do, a figure emerged from the trees. Blonde hair caught the afternoon sun like spun gold. Blue eyes, the exact shade of a summer sky, just like hers, widened in recognition and relief. A sack slung over one shoulder bounced as the figure broke into a run. "Mira!" The voice shattered something in Mira's chest. She dropped the reeds and stood frozen as her twin sister crashed into her, arms wrapping around her so tightly it hurt, and Mira didn't care, because Serenia was here. Serenia had found her. Serenia was real. "You absolute idiot!" Serenia gasped against Mira's shoulder, her voice thick with tears and laughter. "Do you have any idea how hard you've been to track? I've been following your scent for 3 days. 3 days! You move around like a deranged rabbit." Mira's own tears came hot and fast. She buried her face in her sister's hair, breathing in the familiar scent of pine and honey, and felt something in her chest that had been wound tight finally loosen. They stood like that for a long moment, two halves of a whole reunited before Serenia pulled back and promptly hit Mira's shoulder with her fist. "Ow!" Mira yelped. "What was that for?" "For getting yourself exiled, you stubborn fool." Serenia hit her again, lighter this time. "For building that hut even after Alpha Theron warned you, for not telling me you were going to keep building in secret so I could have helped you." Another hit. "For making me worry so much I couldn't sleep. For—" Okay. Mira caught her sister's wrist, laughing despite everything. "I get it. I'm an idiot. The biggest idiot." But Serenia was smiling through her tears, and when she pulled Mira into another hug, it was gentler this time. "Gods, Mira, I thought I'd lost you." "I'm okay," Mira said, though it was only partly true. "I'm surviving." Serenia pulled back and really looked at her then, taking in the hollowed cheeks and 2 prominent bones, the way Mira's clothes hung loose, the exhaustion carved into every line of her face. Her expression hardened. "Barely surviving, from the look of you." She swung the sack off her shoulder and thrust it at Mira. "Here, I brought food, real food, dried meat, bread, cheese, even some of those honey cakes you like." Mira's stomach cramped at the mention of food. She opened the sack with shaking hands and nearly wept at the sight of actual provisions. "Serenia, you shouldn't have. If they find out you brought me supplies, let them find out." Serenia's jaw set in that stubborn way that meant she'd made up her mind and wouldn't be moved. "You're my sister, my twin. Did you really think I'd just let you starve out here alone?" "You weren't the one exiled," Mira said quietly. "You still have a place in the pack, a home, safety. You shouldn't risk all that for me." Serenia's expression softened. She reached out and cupped Mira's face in both hands, forcing her to meet her eyes. "Wherever you are," she said firmly, "that's where I belong. Pack, no pack, exile, prophecy, madness, I don't care. You're my sister. We came into this world together, and we'll face whatever comes together." Fresh tears burned in Mira's eyes. She leaned her forehead against Serenia's, breathing in her sister's presence, and felt less alone than she had in weeks. When they finally pulled apart, Serenia looked past Mira at the partially constructed hut, and her expression became unreadable. "So," she said slowly, "you're still building it?" "Yes." Mira braced herself for mockery or concern or disappointment. "Why? The moon prophecy. The words came out simpler than Mira expected. The dreams haven't stopped. They've gotten worse, more urgent. The voice keeps telling me there's no time, that I have to finish before something terrible happens. Serenia studied her for a long moment, and Mira waited for her sister to say she was mad, to try to convince her to stop, to beg her to come back to the pack and apologize. Instead, Serenia nodded once. Okay. Serenia rolled up her sleeves, revealing the lean muscle of a wolf who'd trained as a warrior before settling into pack life. I don't understand the prophecy. I don't know if the dreams are real or if you've gone a bit mad from isolation. She met Mira's eyes. But I believe you. And if you say we need to build this hut, then we build it. Where do we start? The relief that flooded through Mira was so intense it made her dizzy. She pulled Serenia into another fierce hug, this one saying all the things she couldn't find words for. Then they got to work. With Serenia's help, the progress accelerated dramatically. 2 pairs of hands could accomplish in hours what had taken Mira days alone. Serenia was stronger, better fed, and more skilled with construction than Mira had realized. She approached the building with the same focused intensity she'd once brought to warrior training. The frame needs reinforcement here, she'd say, pointing to a weak joint, and we should angle the roof more steeply to handle rain. They worked in comfortable synchronization, the way twins often did, anticipating each other's movements, understanding without words what needed to be done next. At night, they shared Serenia's supplies and slept side by side beneath the stars, Mira feeling more human than she had since her exile. On the 3rd day of working together, another scent reached them. Both sisters froze, their wolves rising to alert beneath their skin. But this time, Mira recognized the scent before panic could fully take hold. 2 figures emerged from the forest, both male, both carrying packs that looked heavy with supplies. Mira's breath caught as she recognized them. Cade, the mid-ranking wolf who'd discovered her original hut. And beside him, Finn, a young warrior with kind eyes and a crooked smile who'd always treated Mira with more respect than most. "Don't shift," Cade called out quickly, before raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "We're not here to fight. We came to help." "Help?" Serenia moved to stand between them and Mira, protective despite her smaller size. "Why would you help? She's been exiled." "Because we should have helped before," Finn said quietly. His eyes found Mira's, and there was genuine remorse in them. "We should have stood up for you when Beta Garrick wanted to burn your hut. We should have defended you to Alpha Theron. We didn't, and we're sorry." "So you've come to—" "What?" Mira asked, not daring to hope. "Assuage your guilt?" "We've come to build," Cade said. He set down his pack and started pulling out tools, a real axe, saws, hammers, nails, things Mira had been desperately missing. "If you'll have us." Mira looked at Serenia, who shrugged, though her expression said she was pleased. Then back at the 2 males who'd risked exile themselves by coming here. "The hut is for protection," Mira said slowly, "from something terrible that's coming. I don't know when exactly, but the dreams say soon. If you help build it, if you believe me and I'm wrong—" "Then we're wrong together," Finn interrupted. "And we'll deal with the consequences together. That's what a pack is supposed to do, what we should have done from the start." Something tight in Mira's chest finally broke open. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and gestured toward the hut. "We're reinforcing the frame today. If you're serious about helping—" "We're serious," both males said in unison, and they were. Over the following days, more wolves came. A few at first, trickling in 1s and 2s, drawn by word spreading through the pack's younger members. Then larger groups. Some came openly, announcing they were leaving to help Mira. Others came in secret, sneaking away during the night and returning to pack territory before dawn to avoid detection. Even more surprisingly, wolves from neighboring packs began to arrive. "We heard about the prophecy," a grizzled she-wolf from the northern pack said, setting down an armload of treated wood. "Our elders say the moon goddess works in strange ways. If she chose an Omega to carry her message, who are we to question it?" Another group came from the Eastern Territory, bringing food and water stores. "Better to prepare and be wrong than ignore warnings and be dead," their leader said pragmatically. The hut grew. Not just grew, it transformed. What Mira had envisioned as a small shelter became something larger, more substantial. With so many hands helping, they could afford to make it bigger, stronger, capable of holding dozens instead of just one or two. They dug the foundation deeper, sunk posts as thick as a man's torso, built walls of layered wood and stone and packed earth designed to withstand force, created a roof so sturdily thatched and pitched that rain would slide off like water from a duck's back, added internal supports, storage areas, even rudimentary furniture. It stopped being just a hut and became something more, a stronghold, a sanctuary. And through it all, Mira worked alongside everyone else, her body pushed past exhaustion into something that felt almost transcendent. She barely slept, barely ate, but every morning she woke with new energy, driven by dreams that were no longer terrifying but urgent, a pushing her forward with a force she couldn't resist. Soon, the voice whispered every night. Very soon. Hurry. They worked faster. On the 8th day, as Mira was directing the placement of support beams inside the main chamber, a shadow fell across the entrance. Everyone froze. Mira turned slowly, her heart in her throat, expecting to see Alpha Theron or a group of warriors come to punish everyone who'd defied the exile order. Instead, she found Beta Garrick standing in the doorway. The silence that fell was absolute. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Garrick looked older than Mira remembered, new lines carved into his face, his shoulders carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. "Beta Garrick," Mira said carefully. Around her, she could feel the others tensing, preparing for a fight if one came. Garrick's eyes traveled over the interior of the hut, taking in the careful construction, the supplies being stored, the sheer number of wolves who'd gathered to help. When his gaze finally returned to Mira, something in his expression made her breath catch. "I came to apologize," he said quietly. The world tilted sideways. "What?" "I was wrong." The words seemed to cost him something. "I was angry and proud, and I let that blind me to the possibility that you might be telling the truth. When I ordered your hut burned, when I pushed Alpha Theron to exile you, I thought I was protecting the pack from disruption." He paused, swallowed hard. "I didn't know what else to do. You were breaking pack law, claiming visions, causing unrest. I thought you were dangerous." "I am dangerous," Mira said. "Or at least the truth I carry is—" "I know that now." Garrick took a step forward, then dropped to one knee. The gesture shocked everyone present. A beta submitting to an exiled Omega was unheard of. "3 nights ago, I dreamed of fire falling from the sky, of the earth opening up and swallowing everything, of screams and death and destruction." His voice roughened. "And in the dream, I saw this place, this hut, standing while everything around it burned." Mira's wolf rose inside her, recognizing something in his words, in his submission. "The moon goddess doesn't just speak to alphas," Garrick continued. "I understand that now. She speaks to those she chooses, regardless of rank or bloodline, and she chose you." He lifted his head, meeting her eyes directly. "Please, let me help. Let me fix what I broke." Mira looked down at the beta who'd made her life miserable, who'd burned her first hut, who'd pushed for her exile. She should have felt vindicated, triumphant, finally proven right. Instead, she just felt tired. "Get up," she said softly, "and help Finn with the roof supports. We don't have much time." Relief flooded Garrick's expression. He rose, bowed once more, and moved to help without another word. After that, the work took on a different quality. Word of Garrick's involvement spread quickly, and it lent legitimacy to the project that Mira's claims alone couldn't provide. If a beta believed the prophecy, maybe there was something to it after all. More wolves came, entire families, elders who could barely lift tools but insisted on helping however they could. Pups too young to work, but whose presence seemed important somehow, as if the moon goddess wanted them safe. They worked around the clock now, taking shifts, never stopping. Was the hut, no longer just a hut really, it was more like a hall or a lodge, was nearly complete. They'd built sleeping platforms along the walls, stored enough food and water to last weeks, created a central hearth that could provide warmth without setting the thatched roof ablaze. It was the night before they planned to finish the roof that Alpha Theron arrived. He came alone, without fanfare or guards, walking into the clearing where everyone had gathered for a meal. Mira saw him first and felt her stomach drop. Around her, wolves stood or shifted nervously, unsure what his presence meant. Theron's eyes found Mira immediately. He didn't speak, just gestured for her to walk with him. They moved to the edge of the clearing, far enough that the others couldn't hear but close enough that Mira could still see them if she needed to run. "I'm not here to stop this," Theron said without preamble, "or to punish anyone who's helped you." "Then why are you here?" Mira asked, too exhausted for diplomacy. "To see it for myself." He glanced back at the massive structure rising from the clearing. "And to admit that I may have been wrong about you." "May have been?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'm an alpha. We don't admit fault easily." The smile faded. "But yes, I was wrong. The dreams Garrick described, others have had them too. Not everyone, but enough. And the signs..." He paused, and for the first time Mira saw uncertainty in him. "The prey animals have been acting strangely, migrating early, fleeing as if something's chasing them. The birds too. Even the insects seem agitated." "You think something's coming," Mira said. Not a question. "I think if something is coming, and you've built shelter large enough to save our people, then exiling you was the worst mistake I've ever made." Theron looked at her directly. "Your exile is revoked. You and everyone here are welcomed back to the pack with full status and honors, and I'm issuing a command that any wolf who wants to take shelter here if something happens, should do so." Mira's eyes burned. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. If you're wrong, if nothing happens, I'll look like a fool for believing in Omega's visions. And if I'm right?" Theron was quiet for a moment. Then, "If you're right, you'll have saved us all, and I'll owe you a debt I can never repay." He left after that, but his words spread quickly. By morning, even more wolves had arrived, including families with small children and elderly members who'd been too afraid to leave pack territory before. The clearing became a small village, tents and temporary shelters springing up around the central hut. They finished the roof on the 14th day. Mira stood back with Serenia and watched as the last bundle of reeds was tied into place, completing the structure. It was massive, impressive, nothing like the small shelter she'd originally envisioned. This could house 50 wolves comfortably, more if they squeezed together. The walls were thick and sturdy, the roof waterproof, the foundations solid. They'd even dug a well inside so they'd have access to fresh water without needing to leave. "It's beautiful," Serenia said softly. Mira nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. It was beautiful. But more than that, it was done. That night they moved everything inside, all the supplies they'd gathered, dried meat, grains, water in sealed containers, medical herbs, blankets, tools. They organized sleeping areas, designated spaces for different families, created a system for rationing if it became necessary. Nearly 60 wolves were present now. Some had come to help build. Others had arrived in the last few days, drawn by dreams or instinct or simple faith. They filled the hut, making it feel lived in and warm despite the anxiety crackling through the air. Mira stood near the central hearth, watching families settle in, and felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. What if she was wrong? What if the dreams were just dreams, and she'd convinced all these people to abandon their lives for nothing? "Stop it," Serenia murmured, appearing at her elbow. "I can see you spiraling. You did what the moon goddess asked. The rest is up to her." Before Mira could respond, Garrick called for attention. The crowd quieted, faces turning toward him. "We should set watches," he said, his military training evident in his tone. "Rotating shifts. Someone should always be awake and aware in case—" He paused, clearly unsure how to finish that sentence. "In case something happens." "Good idea," Finn agreed. "I'll take first watch with Cade." Others volunteered for different shifts. The organization calmed people, gave them something to focus on besides waiting. Children were settled on sleeping platforms, reassured by parents who were trying hard not to show their own fear. Elders found comfortable spots near the fire. Young warriors took positions near doors and windows, alert and ready. As night fell completely, Mira found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She sat near one of the windows, looking out at the forest beyond, waiting for something she couldn't name. The hours crept by. Midnight passed, then 1 in the morning, 2, 3. Nothing happened. Mira felt doubt creeping in again. Maybe this was it. Maybe they'd built this entire structure for nothing. Maybe the dreams had stopped because she'd completed what they asked for, and now everyone would realize she'd led them on a fool's errand. It was nearly 4 in the morning when Mira heard it. At first, she thought it was her imagination. A low rumble, so deep it was more felt than heard, vibrating through the ground and up through the walls of the hut. Then she saw it, tiny ripples appearing in the water bucket near her feet. Serenia," Mira whispered, her voice catching. "Serenia, wake up!" Her sister sat up immediately, warrior instincts bringing her fully alert in seconds. "What? What is it?" Mira pointed at the water. The ripples were growing larger, more pronounced. Around them, other wolves were stirring, sensing something wrong even in their sleep. The rumbling grew louder, deeper, more insistent. And then the earth began to shake. It started slowly, a gentle trembling that could almost be ignored. But within seconds, it intensified, becoming a violent shuddering that sent tools clattering to the floor and made the walls groan. Someone screamed. Children cried out. Wolves surged to their feet, panic flooding the enclosed space. "Stay inside!" Garrick roared over the chaos. "Everyone stay inside! Don't go out there!" The shaking grew worse. Mira grabbed onto a support beam to keep from falling, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Through the windows she could see trees swaying violently, their trunks bending at impossible angles. The ground outside the hut was rippling like water, cracks appearing and spreading like lightning. Then came a sound that chilled Mira's blood, a high, keening wail that seemed to come from the sky itself. She looked up through the window just in time to see it. A tear in the darkness, a slash of red light that grew wider, brighter until it looked like the sky was bleeding. "Moon goddess, protect us," someone whispered. The first meteor fell. It screamed through the red-lit sky like a judgment from the gods themselves, trailing fire and smoke, and when it struck somewhere in the distance, the impact shook the hut so violently that Mira was thrown to the floor. All around her, wolves were screaming, crying, praying. The sound of destruction reached them even through the thick walls, trees exploding, earth tearing, and underneath it all, the terrible sound of wolves howling in agony from the packs that hadn't believed, that hadn't taken shelter, that were dying as the world came apart. Another meteor fell, and another, and another. Mira crawled to where Serenia had been thrown against the wall and pulled her sister into her arms. Around them, families huddled together, parents shielding children with their bodies, warriors forming protective circles around the elderly and weak. The hut shook with each impact, groaning and creaking, but the walls held. The roof held. The foundation that Mira had built according to the moon goddess's specific instructions held firm while the world outside tore itself to pieces. "We're going to die," someone sobbed. "No," Mira said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "No, the moon goddess showed me this place. She told me to build it exactly as I did. It will hold. It has to hold." As if in answer to her words, another meteor struck close enough that Mira could feel the heat through the walls. The impact sent everyone sprawling, and for a terrible moment, the entire structure tilted, and Mira thought they were about to be buried alive. But then the hut settled, righted itself, held. Through the windows, the sky continued to bleed red light. Through the walls, they could hear the world ending. And inside the hut that an Omega had built because the moon goddess told her to, 60 wolves huddled together in the darkness and prayed for dawn. The first day lasted forever. Mira lost track of time somewhere between the 100th impact and the moment she stopped being able to tell the difference between the earth shaking and her own body trembling. The hut had become a cocoon of darkness and terror, lit only by the red light bleeding through the windows and the small fire they kept burning in the hearth, more for comfort than warmth, because the heat from outside was intense enough to make sweat run down everyone's backs. Children cried until they had no tears left, then whimpered in their parents' arms. The elderly prayed in whispers, their lips moving constantly even when no sound came out. Warriors stood guard at doors and windows even though there was nothing to guard against, nothing they could fight, because standing felt better than cowering. Mira sat with Serenia against the eastern wall, their hands clasped so tightly their fingers had gone numb. Every impact sent shockwaves through the structure, making dust rain down from the thatched roof and the walls groan like living things in pain. Outside, they could hear trees exploding from the force of strikes, boulders shattering, and underneath it all, worst of all, the howls. Wolves dying, wolves screaming, wolves calling for help that would never come. "That's the Northern Pack," Garrick said hoarsely after one particularly anguished series of howls cut off abruptly. He'd positioned himself near the northern window, as if bearing witness was some kind of penance. "I recognize Alpha Torvin's voice. Recognized," he corrected himself, his jaw tight, past tense. "Don't," Finn said quietly. "Don't do that to yourself. Someone should remember." Garrick's eyes remained fixed on the window, on the hellscape beyond. "Someone should know who died out there while we're safe in here." The word safe felt obscene given the circumstances, but it was true. Every meteor that struck close enough to shake them also proved the hut's construction sound. The walls held, the roof held, the foundation that Mira had dug so deep, following instructions from dreams, anchored them against impacts that should have leveled the entire structure. "Your sister knew what she was doing," Cade said to Serenia, his voice carrying an awe that would have made Mira uncomfortable if she weren't so numb with horror. "This shouldn't be standing. The engineering alone, the way the supports distribute force, the angle of the walls, even the depth of the foundation, it shouldn't work, but it does." "The moon goddess knew what she was doing," Mira corrected quietly. "I just followed instructions." Another impact, close enough that the entire hut lifted slightly off its foundation before settling back down. A young mother near the hearth screamed, clutching her infant tighter. The child didn't cry. Mira realized with a chill that the baby had gone silent hours ago, shock rendering it mute. How long could this continue? How much destruction could the world endure before there was nothing left? As if in answer, the barrage intensified. Meteors fell so quickly they created a continuous roar, like standing beneath a waterfall made of fire and stone. The red light from the torn sky grew brighter, more intense, until it hurt to look at. Heat built inside the hut despite the thick walls, making the air shimmer and everyone's breathing come short and labored. "We're going to cook in here," someone muttered. "We're going to survive," Mira said, louder than she meant to, and suddenly everyone was looking at her. 60 pairs of eyes, frightened and desperate and looking for something, someone to believe in. "The moon goddess didn't show me this place, didn't make me build it this way just so we could die of heat. The walls are thick enough. We have water. We just have to endure." "For how long?" a young warrior asked, his voice cracking. "As long as it takes." It wasn't a satisfying answer, but it was honest, and somehow that steadied people more than false promises would have. They settled back into their positions, into their prayers, into the grim business of surviving one moment at a time. The first day bled into the first night with no real change except the quality of darkness. The red light faded to a sullen glow, and the impacts continued, relentless and unforgiving. Mira dozed fitfully against Serenya's shoulder, jolting awake with each close strike, her dreams when they came fragmentary and strange. In one, she saw the moon goddess clearly for the first time, not as a figure but as a presence, vast and ancient and sad. "I'm sorry," the presence seemed to say. "I'm sorry I couldn't warn everyone. I'm sorry you had to carry this burden, but you saved them. Remember that. You saved them." Mira woke with tears on her face. The second day was worse than the first. The impacts continued with mechanical precision, and the howling from outside had stopped entirely. No more screams, no more calls for help, just silence punctuated by explosions and the sound of the world ending. The silence was somehow more terrible than the screams had been. "Everyone's dead," someone said, voicing what they were all thinking. "Everyone who didn't take shelter, they're all dead." "We don't know that," Finn tried, but even he sounded uncertain. "We know," Garrick said flatly. "Nothing could survive this. Nothing except—" He gestured around the hut, at the walls still standing while apocalypse raged outside. This. Food became an issue on the second day. They'd stocked supplies for weeks, but eating felt wrong when the world was dying outside. Still, Mira insisted they maintain rations, wait especially for the children and elderly. Bodies needed fuel even when spirits were broken. The water held, drawn from the well Mira had insisted they dig inside the structure. Another detail from the dreams that had seemed excessive at the time, but now proved invaluable. They'd have died of thirst without it, despite being surrounded by destruction. That night, the second night, brought a new horror. The meteors slowed, their frequency decreasing until minutes passed between impacts instead of seconds. Hope flickered through the group like a candle flame, fragile but bright. Then the earth opened up. The sound was like nothing Mira had ever heard, a deep, grinding roar that came from below instead of above, as if the world's bones were breaking. Through the windows they watched as cracks appeared in the ground, widening into crevasses that glowed with orange light from deep within. "Earthquake," Cade breathed. "Not just tremors anymore, the real thing." The shaking that followed made the previous impacts feel gentle by comparison. The hut bucked and swayed, throwing wolves to the floor, collapsing sleeping platforms, sending supplies tumbling. Someone's arm broke with a snap that made Mira's stomach turn. A support beam cracked, actually cracked, and for a terrible moment she thought the roof would come down on all of them. But the beam held, the walls held, the foundation held. And slowly, impossibly, the earthquake subsided. In the aftermath, as people picked themselves up and tended to injuries and tried to process what had just happened, Mira felt something shift. Not in the hut, but in the atmosphere itself. The quality of destruction outside had changed. The impacts were fewer now, sporadic. The red light was fading. The silence continued through the morning, into the afternoon, through another night. By the fourth day, the need to see, to know, to understand what remained had become unbearable. "We go out at dawn," Garrick finally decided. "Small group first, scout the immediate area. If it seems stable, we can bring everyone out." No one slept that night. They all knew what they'd find outside, or rather what they wouldn't find. The silence had told them everything. But seeing it would make it real in a way that huddling in the hut hadn't. Dawn came gray and cold, the sky no longer torn and bleeding but covered in ash and smoke that blocked the sun. Mira stood near the door with Garrick, Finn, Cade, and Serenya, while the others watched from windows or waited in anxious clusters. "Ready?" Garrick asked quietly. Mira nodded, though she wasn't. "Oh, could anyone ever be ready for this?" Garrick opened the door. The smell hit them first, smoke and char and something else, something organic and wrong that made Mira's wolf whimper and press low inside her chest. Ash hung in the air like snow, drifting down from a sky the color of old bruises. They stepped outside. The world had ended. That was Mira's first coherent thought as she stood in what used to be a clearing and was now a landscape of devastation so complete it looked alien. The ground was scorched black, cracked open in places to reveal glowing orange depths that made heat shimmer in waves. Trees, ancient oaks that had stood for centuries, were gone, reduced to ash or shattered stumps. Boulders had melted. The stream that had run nearby had vanished, its bed dry and cracked. And everywhere were the bodies. And wolves who'd tried to run, wolves who'd tried to dig dens, wolves who'd simply been caught in the open when the sky fell, burned beyond recognition, or crushed beneath stones, or swallowed by the earth itself. Mira's stomach heaved. She turned and vomited into the ash, her body rejecting the horror even as her mind tried to process it. "Gods," Finn whispered. "Gods, gods, gods." They walked in stunned silence through the destruction, picking their way over cracks and around still-burning fires. The packlands, green and lush just days ago, had become a hellscape of ash and death. Nothing moved. Nothing lived. Even the insects were gone, their tiny bodies scattered like seeds among the ruins. It took them an hour to reach what had been the main pack compound, or rather where it should have been. Well, Mira couldn't orient herself at first because all the landmarks were gone. The Great Hall, the communal dens, the training grounds, all of it reduced to rubble and ash. They found Alpha Theron in what might have been his office. He'd clearly tried to take shelter inside the stone building, but stone proved no match for meteors and earthquakes. The roof had collapsed, and Theron lay beneath it, his eyes open and unseeing, his hand still reaching for something, someone they'd never know. "He believed me in the end," Mira said softly, crouching beside the body. "He told everyone to take shelter if they wanted, but he stayed. He stayed with his pack." "Alphas don't abandon their people," Garrick said, his voice rough, "even unto death." They found more bodies as they searched, hundreds of them. Wolves who'd been too proud or too skeptical or too attached to their dens to seek shelter elsewhere. Entire families, whole bloodlines, gone. The neighboring packs had fared no better. Over the following days, as the group from the hut expanded their search radius, they found the northern territory completely destroyed. The eastern pack, known for their massive dens carved into cliff faces, had been buried when the earthquake brought the entire cliff down. The western pack's lands were now a maze of crevasses and lava flows. The destruction was total, complete, exactly as the prophecy had warned. They spent the next month in a daze of mourning and clearing. Every day, groups went out to search for survivors. They found none, and to give the dead whatever dignity they could manage. They couldn't bury all the bodies. There were too many, and the ground was too unstable in places. But they gathered them when possible, said prayers, performed the rites their culture demanded. The children from the hut didn't go on these expeditions. They stayed behind with a few adults, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy in a world gone mad. But the young warriors went. The adults went. Even the elderly who could manage the walk went, because witnessing felt important somehow. Bearing witness to what they'd survived, to what others hadn't. Mira went every day. She felt she owed it to them, to the wolves who'd mocked her, who'd burned her first hut, who'd exiled her. They'd been wrong, but they'd paid for that mistake with everything. The least she could do was remember them. Serenia walked beside her always. A solid presence when Mira's legs threatened to give out, when the weight of survival guilt threatened to crush her. Because guilt was constant now, heavy and suffocating. She'd been right. She'd saved 60 wolves, but hundreds more had died, and some part of Mira couldn't help but feel responsible for not convincing more of them, not making them understand, not being stronger or more persuasive or more something. "You did everything you could," Serenia said one night when she found Mira crying silently in the darkness. More than anyone could reasonably expect. You built the hut. You warned them. Some listened and lived. The rest— Her voice broke. The rest made their choice. Did they? Mira asked. Or did I fail them somehow? Maybe if I'd explained better, if I'd— Stop! Serenia gripped Mira's shoulders, forcing her to meet her eyes. The moon goddess chose you to build shelter. She didn't choose you to convince everyone. That was never your burden to carry. You saved us. Remember that. You saved us. It helped. A little. But the guilt remained, a constant companion as they cleared rubble and burned bodies and tried to make sense of a world that had fundamentally changed. The hut became their permanent home. There was nowhere else to go, no other packs to join. They were all that remained of an entire region's wolf population, 60 survivors where once thousands had lived. They talked about rebuilding, about honoring the dead by creating something new from the ashes, about moving forward because standing still meant death of a different kind. But first, they needed to heal, to mourn, to accept. 1 month to the day after the sky fell, Garrick called for a bonfire. We need this, he said when some protested it felt too soon, too celebratory. Not to celebrate, to remember, to honor, to acknowledge what happened and what we survived and who we lost. They built the fire in the clearing around the hut, using wood from fallen trees that had somehow escaped the worst of the burning. As the sun set, its light still dim through the ash-filled sky, but there, stubbornly there, they gathered in a circle around the flames. All 60 of them, children and elderly, warriors and omegas, wolves from 3 different packs, from different territories, from different bloodlines. United by survival and loss, and the shelter one omega had built because the moon goddess told her to. The fire burned bright against the darkness, its warmth a promise that life continued despite everything. Garrick stood first, his face carved into harsh lines by grief and flamelight. We're here because of Mira, he said without preamble. That's the truth. Harsh, uncomfortable for some of us. But true. He turned to look at her across the fire. She had visions. We called her mad. She built a hut. We burned it. She persisted. We exiled her. His voice roughened. And then she built it again, because the moon goddess commanded it, and she saved us. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. I've been thinking about this past month, Garrick continued, about prophecy and faith and the nature of divine communication. The moon goddess has always spoken to alphas because we're trained to lead, to make decisions, to bear the weight of the pack. But what happens when leading means doing something unpopular? Something that goes against tradition and comfort and everything we think we know? He paused, letting the question settle. Alphas couldn't have done what Mira did, he said finally. We're too invested in maintaining order, in preserving pack structure, too proud to persist when mocked, too bound by tradition to build a human shelter when wolf dens have served us for generations. The moon goddess knew that, so she chose an omega, someone outside the hierarchy, someone with nothing to lose and everything to prove, someone stubborn enough and faithful enough and brave enough to do what needed to be done, even when everyone told her she was wrong. Mira felt tears burning behind her eyes. Around the circle, she saw others crying too, tears that spoke of grief and gratitude tangled together in ways that couldn't be separated. Finn stood next. I didn't believe, he said simply. Not at first. I came here to assuage guilt, not because I truly thought the world would end. But Mira believed. She believed when no one else would. She built when we burned. She persisted when we exiled, and because of that faith, because of that courage, we're alive. One by one, others stood, spoke of their doubts, their journey to belief, their gratitude. A young mother stood with her infant, the same one who'd gone mute during the destruction, and said, My daughter lives because Mira heard the moon goddess and obeyed. That's all that matters to me. An elder spoke of prophecy and how the gods work in mysterious ways. A warrior spoke of shame and redemption. A child no more than 8 stood and said in a clear, piping voice, "Mira saved us. She's a hero." Finally, when the speaking had gone around most of the circle, Serenia stood. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked at Mira, her eyes bright with tears and firelight. "My sister," she said, her voice carrying, despite its softness, "has always been special. Not because of rank or bloodline or physical strength, but because she has something rare and precious, the courage to be true to herself even when the world tells her she's wrong, the strength to persist even when persistence seems insane, the faith to believe even when belief costs everything." She crossed the circle to stand beside Mira, taking her hand. "The moon goddess chose well," Serenia said. "She chose someone who wouldn't give up, who couldn't give up, who would build and build again until the task was complete, who would save us not because she wanted glory or recognition, but because it was right." Then, to Mira's shock, Serenia dropped to one knee. "You're not just my sister," Serenia said. "You're our prophet, the moon's prophet, the voice she chose to speak through, and we owe you everything." "I'm not," Mira started, but Garrick had knelt too, then Finn, then Cade. One by one, all 60 wolves dropped to their knees around the fire, their heads bowed, their submission absolute. "Moon's prophet," they said in unison, and the words carried weight that made Mira's wolf rise and acknowledge them even as her human mind reeled. "Get up," Mira said, her voice shaking. "Please, I don't deserve—" "You deserve this and more," Garrick said. Rising but keeping his posture respectful. "You deserve a title that honors what you did, what you are." "I'm an Omega," Mira protested weakly. "You're the moon's prophet," Garrick corrected. "Chosen by the goddess herself, savior of the pack, builder of sanctuaries, voice of the divine." He smiled, and it was genuine, warm. "Omega is just a rank. Prophet is a calling, and you've earned both the title and our eternal gratitude." The others rose, and the energy around the fire shifted. What had been somber became something else, not quite celebratory, but alive in a way it hadn't been before. Someone started a song, one of the old pack songs about survival and courage. Others joined in, their voices rising toward the ash-dark sky. Mira stood in the center of it all, Serenia's hand still clasped in hers. And felt something shift inside her chest. The guilt didn't disappear, she didn't think it ever would, but it no longer felt like the only thing defining her survival. She'd done what the moon goddess asked. She'd built the shelter. She'd saved who she could save. The rest, the hundreds of dead, the destroyed lands, the world that would need to be rebuilt, that was beyond her control, beyond anyone's control. All she could do was move forward, honor the dead by living. Honor the prophecy by leading these survivors toward whatever future awaited them. As the fire burned and the songs rose and 60 wolves celebrated survival despite everything, Mira looked up at the sky. The moon was hidden behind ash and clouds, but she felt its presence anyway, felt the weight of divine attention, warm and approving. "You did well," the voice whispered, not in her dreams this time, but in the space between heartbeats. In the pause between breaths. "You did exactly what I needed, and now you'll lead them forward, not as an Omega, not as an exile, but as my prophet, my voice, my chosen. Are you ready?" Mira looked around at the faces illuminated by firelight, at Serenia, loyal and fierce, at Garrick, humbled and devoted, at Finn and Cade and all the others who'd believed when belief seemed insane, at the children who would grow up knowing her story, at the elderly who would tell it, at the hut rising behind them, solid and enduring, proof that faith and stubbornness and divine guidance could build miracles from nothing. "Yes," Mira whispered to the hidden moon, to the goddess who'd chosen an Omega to carry impossible truth. "I'm ready." The fire crackled. As the songs continued. And somewhere in the distance, through ash and destruction and grief, the first green shoots were already beginning to push through scorched earth. life persisted, as it always had, as it always would, and the moon's prophet would lead her people forward into whatever came next,